I'm Vanessa Hart, 22 years old, and last month my parents told me they couldn't make it to my Harvard graduation. They were too tired from my sister Chloe's trip to Europe. I didn't argue. I simply replied, "Rest well." What they didn't know was that I was the valedictorian, and the next day my speech was everywhere. By noon my phone was buzzing nonstop with messages, but not from them. Reporters were calling asking why their seats were the only ones left empty. It wasn't long before my parents started calling too panicked and full of questions. Before I get into the rest of it, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. And hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt like you had to prove your worth even to the people who were supposed to see it first. I grew up in a small town in Indiana where everyone knew each other's business. It wasn't just about the house you owned or the car you drove, it was about the pride your parents took in your achievements. For my family, that pride had a name, Chloe. My little sister, who was 2 years younger than me, was the star. She had the golden touch, the smile that lit up a room, and the charm that seemed effortless. And then there was me. I was the afterthought. The girl who fixed the Wi-Fi helped set up for family gatherings and quietly went unnoticed. I learned early that being the quiet one had its place. I don't think my parents meant to ignore me, but they did. They adored Chloe. She was the one they talked about at church, at dinner with their friends. I was just Vanessa, Chloe's sister. No one ever remembered to ask about me unless they needed help with something technical. Even my birthday felt like an afterthought. I'll never forget my 10th birthday. The living room was filled with balloons, pink and gold, just for Chloe. She had won a dance competition, and all the attention shifted to her. I stood next to a cake that read, "Congratulations, Chloe." I smiled, but it didn't feel like my day. It wasn't just that moment. There were others, too. I remember the year I won first place at the local science fair. I had worked for weeks making a wind turbine out of spare parts I found at the junk shop. It spun under the fluorescent gym lights, and I was proud. But when I looked up, I didn't see my parents in the audience. They were at Chloe's recital, where she had to perform a solo that evening. When I asked why they weren't there, they apologized. "We really wanted to be there, sweetie," Mom said, not looking at me. "But Chloe had that recital, and you know how important those things are." It stung, but I didn't argue. I just nodded and smiled. It was the night I learned that no matter what I did, it didn't matter unless it was Chloe's thing. Over the years, I stopped expecting them to show up. It became easier to just let things go. But deep down, I knew that nothing was ever really for me. The people who saw me, really saw me, were few and far between. Grandma Helen was one of them. She lived 2 blocks away in a small white house that always smelled like cinnamon and lavender. One evening after hearing about my science fair win, she came to see me. I was in the garage fixing an old radio. When she found me, she didn't scold me for the mess or ask why I wasn't inside with Chloe helping her with her things. She just sat beside me and watched me work. Then, without warning, she said something that stayed with me for years. "You don't need applause to be valuable, sweetheart. Some of the brightest stars burn quietly where no one looks." I didn't say anything in response, but her words stayed in my heart. They would echo in my mind for years. I grew older, and the silence only grew louder. At school, I learned to hide behind my books, behind my grades, behind my quiet demeanor. It was the only way I could avoid feeling the sting of being overlooked at home. Chloe was always the topic of conversation. Her dance recitals, her new job, her perfect life. I learned how to keep my head down and work. I excelled at everything I did, but it was always for someone else. It wasn't until I turned 17 that I realized how far into the background I'd slipped. I had become so used to being invisible that I no longer noticed how much it hurt. But something shifted in me that year. I knew I had to break free from this quiet existence. And I was determined to do it quietly. Not for them, for me. That's when I started writing. And I didn't know it then, but it would become the beginning of everything. Stay with me. What happened next changed everything for me, and for my family, too. I remember the first time I truly realized the kind of family I was in. It wasn't during a birthday or holiday. It wasn't even during some big family event. It was at my state science fair back in junior high. I'd spent weeks building a model wind turbine, my hands covered in grease, my heart set on winning. I knew it wasn't the grandest project or the flashiest, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. I looked out into the crowd after my name was called for first place. There was one seat reserved for my parents, another for Chloe, but they were both empty. I stood there smiling, but my heart sank a little. I didn't want to let anyone see, but I knew they weren't there. Later that night, Mom apologized. "We really wanted to be there, sweetheart," she said, not quite looking at me. "But Chloe had her recital, and you know how important those things are." I nodded, smiled, and didn't say anything. I hadn't expected anything different. The pattern had already set itself. Looking back, that was the moment I realized how invisible I'd become. I wasn't even mad at them. I just stopped expecting them to show up. At home, I was always the one who didn't need attention. I was the one who stayed quiet, did my work, and kept to myself. Chloe was the golden child, the one everyone loved, the one everyone talked about. And in a way, I learned to accept that. She had her place, and I had mine. It wasn't always fair, but I learned to adapt. As time went on, things didn't really change. Chloe kept winning dance competitions, being the center of attention, while I fixed the Wi-Fi at home or stayed late to help teachers at school. Whenever I did get attention, it felt like it wasn't really for me. It was more like I was just helping make things work for everyone else. I'd win awards, get good grades, but the praise never really felt like it was for me. It was for Chloe. And it didn't matter how much I excelled. Her accomplishments were always the ones that got talked about. I did what I could to stay busy to hide my frustrations. I kept my head down and worked excelling at the things that mattered most to me. I got into debate club, volunteered at the library, and kept pushing myself to be the best student I could be. I wasn't looking for their praise. I was looking for something else, maybe something I hadn't figured out yet. Grandma Helen was the only one who ever saw through the silence. She would visit sometimes just to check in, and she always made sure I knew I wasn't invisible to her. I remember one evening when she came over after hearing about my science fair win. I was in the garage tinkering with an old radio, my hands covered in grease. When she saw me, she didn't scold me for the mess or ask why I wasn't helping Chloe with her recital. She simply sat next to me and watched as I worked. "You don't need applause to be valuable, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentle. "Some of the brightest stars burn quietly where no one looks." I didn't reply, but those words stayed with me, echoing in my mind long after she left. She had a way of seeing me that no one else did. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't have to chase attention. I didn't have to chase recognition. Maybe, just maybe, there was something else that could matter. The years went on, and as I entered high school, I did what I'd always done. I worked hard, stayed quiet, and kept my distance. The harder I tried to be seen, the more I realized no one was really looking. Mom and Dad's attention was still all on Chloe, and I began to believe it wasn't even worth trying to be noticed. I was the one who helped when things broke, the one who quietly stayed in the background. I accepted my role as the dependable one, the one who didn't need anything. But inside, I was building something that no one knew about yet. It wasn't a secret in the traditional sense. I wasn't hiding anything. I was just learning to depend on myself. I started to understand that while Chloe's life was constantly in the spotlight, mine wasn't any less valuable. It just looked different. By the time I was 17, I'd stopped expecting my parents to show up. I had learned to blend in to be the one who stayed behind the scenes. In class, I was always the quiet one, always prepared, but never loud. I joined clubs, took on extra projects, and kept my grades perfect. I wasn't aiming for recognition anymore. But at home, none of it mattered. None of it compared to Chloe's life. Then one day, everything changed. It started with a conversation with my English teacher, Mr. Lee. He had been watching me for years, quietly encouraging me. He'd seen my potential even when I couldn't see it myself. He pulled me aside one day after class, and for the first time, someone in my life told me I was worth more than I had ever given myself credit for. "You're thinking small," he said. "You don't belong in this town forever, Vanessa. You have potential, and I want to recommend you for Ivy League schools." He handed me a letter of recommendation for Harvard, Yale, Princeton, wherever I wanted to go. I had never even dreamed of something like that. But when I looked at that letter, I realized I had a chance to break free. I had a chance to build a life of my own, to make my own path. I filled out the application slowly, my hands trembling as I typed the answers. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't think I'd even be considered. but I wrote about belonging, how I had spent so much of my life feeling invisible, and how through that silence I had learned to find my own voice. When I hit send on that application, I didn't know what would happen. I was just glad to finally be doing something for myself. I sent in the application, and months later I received an acceptance letter from Harvard. I stood in my kitchen staring at the letter in my hands, barely able to believe it. But my parents, as usual, were not there to see it. They didn't even seem to care. They hadn't seen me for years, and the reality was finally hitting me. I wasn't just looking for their approval anymore. I was done chasing it. I folded the letter and slipped it into my drawer, feeling a strange mix of pride and disappointment. For a moment, I almost wished they would care. But deep down, I knew better. Next time, things would be different. But for now, I was going to focus on myself. And that was the first step. Harvard was a world I never could have imagined. The campus was grander than anything I had seen in the small town where I grew up, and the air felt different, charged with a quiet sense of ambition. I had never been someone who sought out attention, but I couldn't help but feel a thrill as I stepped through those gates. The world I'd entered was full of possibilities, a stark contrast to the narrow, quiet life I had known before. I wasn't just a student at Harvard. I was someone who had fought to be here. Still, despite the excitement, there was an ache that followed me wherever I went. It wasn't just homesickness, though I did miss the familiarity of Indiana. It was the hollow feeling I carried inside whenever I thought of my parents. They weren't there to see me off, and they weren't there to cheer me on. I knew better than to expect them to change now. It was something I had grown used to over the years, being overlooked, being invisible. The ache wasn't just about them not being there. It was about realizing I had built a life that they couldn't even see. I'd worked so hard to get here, and yet they still didn't show up. At Harvard, it didn't matter how hard I worked. It didn't matter how many hours I spent in the library or how many clubs I joined. I had built a life that was my own, and it was hard not to wonder if they would ever truly see it. It felt as though I was living two different lives, one where I was making my own way, and one where I was still that quiet girl waiting for someone to notice her. My roommate, Maya Patel, was one of the few people who truly understood me. She was the kind of person who saw me for who I was, not who my parents thought I should be. She was always busy, always full of energy, and she became the closest thing I had to a family. It was with her that I celebrated small victories, moments of clarity, and quiet triumphs that no one else seemed to care about. When I told her about the school's Women in Tech Club, she immediately pushed me to apply for leadership roles. "I can already tell you're going to do amazing things here," she'd say with that infectious energy of hers. It wasn't easy, of course. Harvard was relentless. The late nights at the library, the constant pressure to perform, the fear of failure, it all weighed on me. And every time I earned a victory, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. It never seemed to matter to anyone who mattered most. I received awards, I was invited to conferences, but still it felt like an echo in a hollow room. No one was there to fill the silence. And then came the moment that would change everything. The email arrived late one evening after I'd spent hours revising a research proposal. I opened it quickly, not expecting anything. But as soon as my eyes landed on the subject line, I froze. The email read, "Congratulations, you have been selected as the 2024 Student Commencement Speaker." My heart raced as I read the words over and over. I didn't know what to do at first. I hadn't even thought about it. Hadn't considered the possibility that I might be asked to speak at my graduation. Maya found me sitting there staring at the screen, unable to process it. "You did it," she said, throwing her arms around me. "You're the speaker." "Oh my God, this is huge," I nodded, but inside I was still reeling. I couldn't help but wonder what my parents would think. Would they care now? Would they finally see me for what I had become? I didn't know the answer, but one thing was certain: I was going to stand up there and speak. Not for them, but for me. For everyone like me, the ones who were overlooked and underestimated. I didn't share the news with my parents immediately. What was the point? They hadn't even shown up for the things that mattered before. They weren't going to care now either. The thought of telling them felt almost pointless. Instead, I shared it with Maya, and together we started planning for graduation. "I'm so proud of you," she said one night as we sat on my bed surrounded by empty coffee cups and textbooks. "This is your moment. Don't let anyone take it away from you." I nodded, trying to believe her. In the back of my mind, I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe this was the moment where things would finally change. Maybe this would be the time when my parents would see me. But the longer I thought about it, the more I realized that hoping for their recognition was something I couldn't keep doing. I wasn't going to spend my life chasing their approval. And so as the weeks passed, I threw myself into preparing for my speech. I spent hours at the library refining my words, making sure they conveyed everything I wanted to say. It wasn't about impressing anyone anymore. It was about standing in my truth. The words came to me easily. I had spent years building a life that no one else had seen. I had been the invisible one, the quiet one who always did the work without expecting a reward. But now I was going to make sure the world knew what I had achieved. Then the day before graduation, something happened that I wasn't prepared for. My mom texted me saying she couldn't make it to my graduation. She said she was too tired from Chloe's trip to Europe. Chloe had been in Paris for a law conference and they had just gotten back. I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I had expected this in a way, but to hear it again, to feel the weight of their absence one more time, was like a punch in the gut. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and typed back, "Rest well." That was all I said. No sarcasm, no bitterness, just 2 words that felt like they carried everything. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. I didn't need to beg them to show up. The next day, I stood in the center of Harvard Yard waiting for my turn to speak. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I didn't feel nervous. I felt ready. Ready to speak for every person who had been overlooked, ready to finally be seen. But as I looked around, I couldn't help but notice the empty chair, the one where my parents should have been sitting. It wasn't the first time I had faced that empty seat, and it wouldn't be the last. Next, I would step onto that stage, and for the first time, I wasn't just speaking for me. I was speaking for all the people who had ever been ignored, who had ever been invisible, who had ever been told they weren't enough. I was ready to make my voice heard. The day of graduation arrived faster than I expected. I could feel the weight of it in my bones, but not in the way I thought. It wasn't nerves or excitement that had me up early that morning, but a strange sense of peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing deep down you've done something for yourself. You've built something no matter how long it took or how quiet the journey was. I slipped into my gown, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The crispness of the fabric, the weight of the tassel on my cap, it all felt surreal. I had worked so hard to get to this point, and here I was, ready to walk into that auditorium with my head held high. No matter who was in the audience or who wasn't, I had made it. Maya was in the dorm room with me, bustling around, adjusting her camera, making sure she caught every moment. She was excited for me, but there was something else in her eyes, too, something softer. She was proud, and I could see it in the way she smiled at me as I put on my cap. "You're going to do great," she said, her voice warm but full of that little excitement she always had. "Just remember, you're doing this for yourself." I smiled back at her, thankful. She was there, even if she was the only one. The walk to the ceremony felt like something out of a dream. The air was cool but carried the scent of spring, and the campus felt alive with anticipation. The crowd was already gathering near Sanders Theater, a sea of crimson gowns, families gathering photos being taken, laughter echoing through the yard. Everywhere I looked, there were families together, proud, celebrating their achievements. And then there was me, standing off to the side, watching them, wondering if I'd ever belong to that group. I kept walking, my feet carrying me across the yard. As I passed the rows of seats, some still empty, others filled with students and their families. It was hard not to notice the reserved seats where my parents should have been sitting. They had always been there in spirit, but they had never really been there. And now, even on the day that was supposed to be the culmination of everything I'd worked for, they weren't there. I thought I'd be angry about it. I thought it would hurt more than it did. But there was a strange calm within me. I didn't need them to see me. I had done this for me, not for them. And the people who had shown up, like Maya and Grandma Helen, they were enough. As I made my way to my seat in the auditorium, I couldn't help but glance toward the family section. The seats were clearly labeled, but they sat empty, untouched. There was that third seat, the one I had requested. the one I had reserved for whoever showed up. I could feel the weight of that empty chair on my chest, but instead of feeling sad, I felt a kind of relief. This was my moment, not theirs, and as the ceremony began, the familiar chords of pomp and circumstance filled the air. A wave of emotion swept through me, but it wasn't sadness or anger. It was something different, something freeing. When the moment finally came and my name was announced as the valedictorian, I stood slowly, the applause washing over me. I wasn't sure if it was for me or for the occasion itself, but it didn't matter. I walked across the stage with a steady pace, feeling every step ground me in the truth of what I had accomplished. I wasn't the girl who had waited for recognition anymore. I wasn't waiting for anyone to give me permission to be proud of myself. As I stood at the podium, I looked out over the sea of faces in front of me. It was strange. Even with all the eyes on me, I still felt like I was standing alone. But in that moment, I wasn't afraid of the silence. I wasn't afraid of the empty seats. I had learned how to fill them with my own voice, my own worth. I took a deep breath and began my speech, letting the words flow, not for anyone in particular, but for the years of quiet persistence that had brought me here. I spoke of the quiet ones, the ones who worked in the shadows, who built their lives without the applause. I spoke for the ones who were always overlooked, always second to someone else, but who kept pushing forward. When I reached the end, I looked toward the family section once more, my eyes resting on that empty chair. But this time I didn't feel the ache I thought I would. Instead, I felt proud that I had stood here on my own, proud that I had found my voice. And so I finished, "May we remember to leave no chair empty for those who come after us, because when the world forgets to see them, we must." The applause that followed was deafening, and for a moment it felt like I could hear everything, the clapping, the cheers, and the silent acknowledgement of all those who had stood by me even when no one else had. I stepped down from the stage, my heart racing, but there was no anxiety. I had done it. I had spoken my truth, and the world had listened. Even if my parents weren't there to hear it, the world had. Afterward, Maya found me again, her eyes bright with pride. "You did it," she said, pulling me into a tight hug. "You made them hear you." I smiled, but there was no need for further explanation. She already knew. I had made my own space. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had found my place even without them. But as the day continued, something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed. At first I thought it was more messages from friends and classmates congratulating me. But when I saw who was calling, I hesitated. It was my mom, then my dad, and then Chloe. I stared at the screen for a moment, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. The calls kept coming one after another. I didn't answer. This wasn't about them. I walked out of the auditorium, leaving behind the chaos of graduation, and stepped into the calm of Harvard Yard, where everything felt still. The sun was setting and the air was filled with the faint sound of distant laughter. I had made it, and for the first time I was content knowing I didn't need anyone else to tell me that. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But what happened next was something I hadn't anticipated. Tomorrow, the world would start calling, and the truth would finally be revealed. The next morning, as I sat in my small apartment overlooking Harvard Square, my phone buzzed again. It had barely stopped vibrating since the night of my speech. I had ignored most of the calls the night before from family and friends alike, but this morning as I stared at the screen, I saw the name I had been avoiding, Mom. I let it ring, then it buzzed again, and again. It seemed like no matter how much I wanted to leave it behind, the noise from my family's disapproval followed me like a shadow I couldn't shake. I had expected the silence the night before, but now it felt suffocating. Maya was sitting across from me, scrolling through her phone, her usual calm energy still there, but I could sense the tension in the air. She could tell something had shifted in me. "You're not going to answer, are you?" she asked, her voice low, careful. I shook my head, but there was no anger in me anymore, just an odd sense of peace. I had done something for myself. The whole world had heard me, even if my family hadn't. That thought was both empowering and heavy at the same time. "I can't keep doing this," I said quietly. "I can't keep hoping they'll see me. It's just not worth it anymore." Maya nodded understanding. She had been with me through so much of this. The late nights, the endless studying, the invisible victories I had celebrated alone. But Maya also understood that there was a point where you had to stop chasing people who weren't ever going to catch up. The phone buzzed again, and I finally answered, feeling the weight of the decision on my chest. I knew what was coming. The words I would hear, the accusations and attempts to explain their absence, it was all too familiar. "Vanessa, you need to listen to me." My mom's voice came through, tight and strained. "We saw the speech. We heard what you said. We're not trying to hurt you, but you need to understand. We didn't know it was that important." I closed my eyes, my fingers gripping the edge of the table. The same old excuses, the same disconnection from everything I had been feeling for years. "You didn't know," I repeated, my voice quiet, steady. "You've never known." There was a long pause. I didn't need to say more. I could hear the guilt in her silence, the weight of everything they had missed. "I'm sorry, Vanessa," she said, her voice soft, almost apologetic. "I didn't realize how much it hurt you. We didn't think we were doing anything wrong." I took a deep breath. "You weren't there. And every time I tried to tell you, it was just silence. You didn't see it, and now you're asking me to explain it all. Again." Maya was watching me, her face a mixture of support and concern. She knew this moment was inevitable, but somehow it still felt like it came too soon. I stood up, walking to the window and looking out over the square, the street below, bustling with people. It felt like such a contrast to the stillness I had lived in for so many years. I didn't want to be angry, but there was a quiet hurt that was impossible to ignore. "I'm not doing this anymore," I said softly into the phone. "I've spent my whole life waiting for you to see me, to notice me. But I'm done. I'm here. I'm standing in my own light, and it doesn't need your approval." My mom's voice cracked, a soft sob escaping her. "Vanessa, please don't. I'm not asking for anything anymore." I cut her off, my tone final. "I've learned to live without you noticing. And maybe it's better that way." I hung up the phone before she could say anything else. The call ended not with a burst of anger or sadness, but with a quiet sense of release. A part of me had finally let go of the hope that had been holding me back for so long. Maya was still sitting there watching me with a kind of gentle understanding. "You okay?" she asked softly. I nodded slowly, exhaling a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. "Yeah, I think I am." It wasn't the closure I had always wanted. It wasn't the apology I had imagined for years, but it was the end of something. And with that, something else began. Later that day, I got another message. This one was from Chloe. "Vanessa, I can't believe you did that. We've been supporting you from the sidelines, but you made it look like we were the bad guys. This isn't how it should have gone down." I stared at her message for a long time. The words stung, but they weren't surprising. Chloe had always been the center of attention, and now that the spotlight was on me, she couldn't handle it. She had always been the one who needed everyone to watch her, but now there was no one left for her to stand over. I didn't respond to Chloe's message. I didn't need to. Her words didn't have the power they used to. Not anymore. That night I sat down to write. Grandma Helen had given me a leather-bound notebook when I was younger, and I hadn't touched it in years. But something told me it was time to write again. This time it wasn't about the hurt. It wasn't about the silence. It was about everything I had learned, everything I had grown into. And for once, the words felt like they were flowing freely, as if I wasn't holding anything back anymore. I wrote about the empty chairs, the ones no one had ever bothered to sit in. I wrote about the strength that had been born in the silence. I wrote about the day I stood on that stage and found my voice not for anyone else, but for me. When I finished, I closed the notebook and set it aside. Tomorrow would be another day, another step. But tonight I had done something for myself, and that felt like enough. But as the days passed, the reality of what I had done began to sink in. The calls from my parents didn't stop. The messages from Chloe didn't stop. But the more they came, the clearer it became, nothing had changed. They had expected me to come crawling back to explain myself, but I wasn't going to play that game anymore. And the calls kept coming. Tomorrow, I would have to decide how much longer I could hold my ground. The calls kept coming, and so did the messages. One by one, they all left me with the same knot in my stomach. My phone buzzed every hour, sometimes more. At first, it was my mom, then my dad, and even Chloe, each one expressing a different version of surprise confusion and a little bit of guilt. They wanted to know why I hadn't told them about my speech, why I hadn't warned them, why I made them look bad. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button, but I didn't press it. Not this time. I had been answering them for years, answering for things I hadn't even done, explaining myself when I hadn't been seen. I had a moment where I thought about reaching out. I thought about telling them how it felt to have them not show up, how it felt to be invisible in my own family. But in the end, I realized there was nothing left to say. I had spent too many years trying to make them see me, trying to make them understand, and all I had gotten in return was silence. When I didn't answer their calls, I felt a strange kind of relief. It was the first time I wasn't waiting for their approval. I had spent my life trying to measure up to their expectations, only to realize that their standards would never be mine. I didn't need them to see me anymore. I was already seeing myself. Maya could tell something had changed. The tension in the air between us was palpable, but she didn't press me. She just waited as she always did, her quiet presence filling the space without the need for words. She understood. Maya had been there through everything, the good, the bad, and the invisible. "Vanessa, you okay?" she asked one evening after a quiet dinner. "You've been distant the past few days." I nodded, setting my glass down on the table. "Yeah, I needed some space, I guess, from everything." I smiled, but it wasn't for her benefit. It wasn't for anyone's benefit. It was for me. I had learned to be okay with silence. "You don't have to explain anything to anyone," Maya said softly, her voice steady. "You've done so much. You don't owe them anything anymore." The words were simple, but they carried weight. It was a reminder I didn't know I needed. Maya had always been the one person in my life who saw me. She didn't need to ask for validation, and she never made me feel like I needed to explain myself to her. But that's when I realized something. I had spent my life seeking that same kind of unconditional understanding from my family. I wanted them to see me the way Maya did, to love me without strings attached, without needing me to be someone else. But no matter how much I tried to explain myself, it wasn't going to happen. It wasn't long before the email arrived. I opened it slowly, not knowing what to expect. When I saw the subject line, my stomach dropped. It was a message from Harvard Alumni Affairs. At first I thought it was just a routine update, but as I clicked open the email, my eyes landed on the first line. "Congratulations, your commencement speech has been selected to be featured on the Alumni Network's website." My heart raced. This wasn't just an email congratulating me. This was something bigger. I had known my speech had made an impact, but I never imagined it would spread like this. It was starting to feel real. My story, my voice was finally being heard. But then came the rush of emotions I hadn't prepared for. Along with the congratulations came a follow-up request from the Alumni Network. They wanted to know if I was available for interviews. They wanted to discuss my journey, my background, my message. Suddenly, the quiet, small space I had built for myself felt a little too big, a little too public. I was still processing everything. I hadn't expected this. I hadn't expected to be recognized for something I had done for myself. But now here I was, standing on the edge of something new, something that I hadn't planned for. It was a moment of quiet victory, but also a moment of uncertainty. Maya sat across from me, reading through a text on her phone. She looked up when she noticed the change in my expression. "What's up?" she asked, putting her phone down. "They want to feature my speech on the alumni website." I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Maya's face lit up with excitement. "That's amazing, Vanessa. You're going to change lives with this." I wanted to smile, but I didn't feel ready. "I don't know if I'm ready for all of this," I said honestly. "It's like everything is happening so fast." Maya tilted her head, thinking for a moment. "You've always been ready. It's just about stepping into your own light now. You've earned it." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so long waiting for my family to recognize me, but now I realized that Maya was right. It wasn't about waiting for someone to notice anymore. It was about stepping into the light that I had created for myself. But as the days went by, I couldn't help but think of my family. I thought about the empty chair at graduation. I thought about the message Chloe had sent me about how she was hurt, about how they didn't understand why I had done what I did. But then I remembered something Grandma Helen had told me once. Love doesn't wait for perfect timing. Love shows up when it's needed most. And I had shown up. For myself. No one else could define my worth anymore. I thought of the coming interviews, the press surrounding my speech, and the calls from my parents that hadn't stopped. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to respond right away. I didn't owe them anything. I could hear their voices in my head, their concerns about how I had gone public with my message. They didn't understand, but they were never meant to. I wasn't trying to make them understand anymore. I was just trying to be me. As I prepared to speak to the press about my speech, I realized something. This was my time, my moment, and nothing could take that away. I had already chosen my path, and now I was walking it with my head held high. Tomorrow, the world would know my story, and no matter what happened, I would finally be seen. But as I walked through Harvard Yard, my phone buzzing again, I knew one thing for sure: the world might be watching. But it was the people who had stayed with me, Maya, Grandma Helen, and even the quiet moments in my own heart that had gotten me here. And they would be with me no matter what came next. And in that moment, I wasn't afraid of what was to come. I was ready. The morning after this commencement ceremony was quiet, a sharp contrast to the chaos of the previous day. I woke up early, feeling a weight settle over me. The past few days had been a whirlwind: interviews, press requests, social media attention. But in the calm that followed, something unexpected happened. I finally let myself feel. And what I felt was not the joy I thought I'd be overwhelmed by, but a quiet sense of peace. I had expected to be on top of the world, celebrated, and yet there was a part of me that wasn't sure how to handle it. This was what I had always dreamed of: to be seen, to be heard, to have everything I worked for acknowledged by the world. But as the reality of it all settled in, I found myself wanting something more. I wanted the people who had always been a part of my life, the people who raised me, or should have, to see me, to truly see me for the first time. The night before, I had stood on that stage giving my speech. A speech that was a culmination of everything I had ever wanted to say. It felt freeing to speak those words, to make them heard by more than just the students in the audience, but the world. It was my moment. And yet, as I stepped down from the podium, I couldn't shake the feeling that the one thing I had wanted the most, my family, wasn't there. They hadn't been in the audience, and they didn't seem to care. It wasn't just a matter of absence anymore. It was a matter of absence that stretched back for years. I stared out my window as the morning light flooded into the room, thinking of everything that had led up to this point. My childhood had been spent in the shadows of my younger sister Chloe, the golden child, the one who always had my parents' attention, the one who was always seen praised and celebrated. For me, there was always a quiet emptiness when it came to my accomplishments. I would do well in school, get great grades, and yet it was never enough. Chloe's recital always seemed to be the focus of the evening. My science fair ribbon would sit unmentioned in the background. It had been a silent struggle, one I had grown accustomed to. The years of showing up for myself quietly without the fanfare. But now, standing in my own light, I realized how deeply it had hurt. I had pushed those feelings down, buried them beneath my ambition, beneath my studies. But they were still there, still haunting me. Maya came into the room, her usual energy filling the space. She had been with me through everything, through the late nights, the stress, the moments when I wanted to give up. She had seen me when I was invisible to everyone else. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly, taking a seat next to me by the window. I shrugged, not really sure how to answer. "I don't know," I said after a beat. "I should be happy, right? I mean, it's everything I've worked for. But it feels like something's missing." Maya's eyes softened, and she placed a hand on mine. It's okay to feel that way. You've worked so hard for this, but you don't have to have all the answers right now. The world might see you, but you still have to figure out what you want to do with that." I nodded, but inside, I was torn. The idea of my family calling me now after everything felt complicated. They hadn't been there when it mattered most, and now they were scrambling for a piece of what I had built. The truth was that I didn't know if I was ready to face them, ready to hear the same old excuses. As the days passed, the calls from my parents didn't stop. But this time, it wasn't about my graduation or my speech. It was about something else. It was about their realization that they had been left behind. They couldn't understand why I wasn't responding to their calls, to their messages. They couldn't understand why I wasn't celebrating with them, why I was so distant. One afternoon, I decided I was ready to hear what they had to say. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking as I pressed the green icon. I was bracing myself for the same old patterns, the same conversations that always ended in misunderstandings. But when my mom's voice came through, I was surprised by the lack of confrontation. It was just an apology, one that felt long overdue. "We saw the speech," she said, her voice quiet, almost tentative. "And I'm sorry, Vanessa. I didn't realize how much this all meant to you." I could feel the years of hurt rising to the surface, but I pushed it back down. I wasn't going to let this become another argument. "It's okay, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "It's not about the speech. It's about everything before that. I've been waiting for you to see me for a long time." There was silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, but she didn't speak for a long while. When she did, it was softer. "I don't know what else to say. I've always been proud of you, but I didn't know how to show it. And I think I've been showing it to the wrong person." I closed my eyes hearing her words, but not sure if I was ready to believe them. "It's not about Chloe," I said gently. "It's about me, and it always has been." After a long pause, my mom finally spoke again. "You're right. We've messed up, but you're still our daughter, and we love you." I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to feel the relief that should have come with those words, but another part of me knew that it wasn't enough. The damage had been done over the years, and I didn't know if it could be undone with a single apology. But for the first time, I wasn't angry. I was just tired of fighting for something that wasn't coming. "I know, Mom," I said, my voice quieter now. "But I can't keep waiting for you to show up. I've already moved on from that." I ended the conversation with a calmness that surprised me. I wasn't upset, and I wasn't looking for anything more. I had found my peace in this journey, and it wasn't dependent on them. It was mine. The following days were filled with a kind of quiet reflection. I spent more time with Maya talking about everything and nothing at all. But beneath it all, I knew I was standing at a crossroads. I had done everything I could to make this moment mine, and now I had to decide what came next. But the calls from my parents kept coming. And eventually, I would have to decide if I was ready to open that door again. For now, though, I was content with the space I had created. The silence, though heavy, no longer felt like a burden. It was mine, and I was ready to move forward. What I didn't know yet was how much more I would have to learn before I could truly close the door on them. The next chapter, I knew, was just beginning. It's been a few months since graduation now, and I find myself sitting on the balcony of my apartment looking out at the busy streets of Boston. It's quiet in the way that a city can feel still, even while everything around it moves at a rapid pace. The air is crisp, and the sunset casts a golden glow over the buildings. I've gotten used to this view, this life I've built for myself. But every so often, my mind drifts back to those moments in Harvard Yard, those first steps I took when I finally spoke my truth to the world. I've learned something important over these past months. The loudest victories are often the ones we win quietly. After my speech went viral, the calls stopped coming. Not just from my parents, but from everyone who had once tried to make me fit into a mold I never asked for. I used to think I needed their approval. I used to think that if I could just prove my worth, they'd finally see me. But what I've come to understand is that the only approval I ever needed was my own. As much as I'd like to say that my family's apology was enough to heal the wounds of years gone by, the truth is healing doesn't always come that quickly. But it did come. Slowly, gently, and in the small moments of clarity I had in between the noise of the world. My mom called me once after that, a simple conversation where she didn't apologize for the 1,000th time, but just listened. We talked about nothing in particular, and yet everything felt different. It wasn't grand or life-changing, but it was real. For the first time in years, she had heard me, really heard me, without trying to fix me or make me something I wasn't. Chloe reached out too, though that was more difficult. She wanted to know why I didn't give her a chance to explain herself, why I had made everything public. And honestly, I couldn't tell her. I didn't have the right words to explain how many years of invisible pain had built up inside me until I just couldn't carry it anymore. She didn't understand it, and I realized she never would. Maybe that's the hardest part of all, knowing some people won't ever get it. Not because they don't want to, but because they've never had to. But there was something different about that conversation, too. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't make everything right, but there was a moment where I stopped trying to fix her and just accepted her where she was. I realized that not everyone will understand, and that's okay. Grandma Helen came to visit me a few weeks later. She always knows the right things to say, and somehow she always knows when I need her. We sat on the couch and I told her about the phone calls, about how everything was changing, but not quite in the way I had imagined. She looked at me with those wise eyes, and for a moment it felt like the world slowed down. "You've been carrying other people's expectations for so long, darling," she said softly. "You've been their reflection, their idea of who you should be. But now you're starting to build your own image, and it's the one that matters." Her words stayed with me long after she left. She didn't offer advice, she didn't try to make me feel better, but in her simple statement, I realized something crucial. I didn't need their vision of me anymore. It was time to build my own, to stop living for anyone else's approval, and instead start living for my own fulfillment, to stand tall in my own truth without apologizing. As time passed, things settled. I found myself growing in ways I hadn't expected. The work I'd always been passionate about, using data and AI to improve healthcare, started taking shape in ways that felt meaningful, not just for me but for others. I was no longer chasing the elusive approval of my family. I was building something that would last, something that had nothing to do with them or their expectations. It was my creation, my path forward. And for the first time, it felt right. The calls from my parents, the messages from Chloe, all stopped eventually. Not because they were any less important, but because I had stopped needing them to define me. I didn't need them to validate the life I had built, and I no longer needed to explain myself. I had given them a chance to see me. They hadn't. But that was okay. I had learned that love doesn't always look the way you expect it to. Sometimes it's a quiet peace you find within yourself. I still think about the empty chair sometimes. It used to be a symbol of everything. I didn't have the approval I craved, the recognition I thought I needed. But now, when I think about that chair, I see it differently. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories come from standing alone. The people who truly matter will always show up when it counts. And the rest? They're just part of the story you tell yourself, the one you choose to let go of when it no longer serves you. I've learned that we all deserve a seat at the table, but the table doesn't have to be set by anyone else. We can build our own seats. We can fill them with the people who show up for us, who see us for who we truly are, and not for who they want us to be. The hardest part is recognizing that you don't have to keep waiting for the people who won't show up. As I sit here watching the world move around me, I think about how far I've come, how much I've learned, and how much more I have to give. But this time, it's not about proving anything to anyone. It's just about living. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever been in a place where you felt overlooked, I hope you find the courage to build your own seat. It's waiting for you. Take it and make it your own. And if you've made it this far, take a moment to reflect. How have you built your own space? Have you started to see yourself for who you truly are? If you feel like sharing, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you can join me again. Take care.